All right, recording is going. Letting folks in here. I think most people know the drill, but welcome everyone who's coming on to our April Hot Topics. We have Amy Shambach here with our Aquaculture Marketing and Outreach. She's the Aquaculture Marketing and Outreach Associate. Courtney, you jinxed it. I already goofed up. We'll let people in here for the next few minutes. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It is being recorded, so feel free to share this with other folks. We've got the Eat Midwest Fish as our topic today.
Did you go live?
I did. We're recording. So I am going to, for all of you guys who are returning from other Hot Topics, welcome back. For those for the first time here, we're just, this whole program with Hot Topics is just to highlight different specialists around the state. We do have all the recordings available on our YouTube channel. So if you've missed one, feel free to do that. Anyone who is an Extension Master Gardener, this works out perfectly for 1 hour of education. So make sure you put that in your records. I'm going to put up our poll here. This is our demographics poll. We do this every time. This is something Purdue likes us to do, completely voluntary, but it does help us with our numbers. So if you don't mind filling that out as we're waiting for folks to jump on, we would greatly appreciate that. And then we will also have a survey at the end. This is where you guys get to put in some of your input as you're listening to these talks. And thank you to everyone who's answered those in the past. That is very valuable information for us as we continue this. And then our speakers get some great feedback too. So just the demographics poll for now. We'll go for a few more minutes. Okay, checking we're recording. It is 12:01. So Amy, we're going to leave the poll up for now, but the floor is going to be yours. I'll kind of let you introduce yourself. And typically how we run this is, and Courtney kind of mentioned it, we try to go for, 50 minutes or so. And then if there's questions at the end, we'll do that. Please, everybody who's joining us, if you would put your questions in the chat box. We are recording this, so we want to have as little background noise as possible. But Amy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to get to talk about Eat Midwest Fish and aquaculture in Indiana and the Midwest. And so let's see if I can figure out how to advance my slides. I'm going to start by introducing myself, and then we'll talk about seafood consumption, what is aquaculture, the Eat Midwest Fish program, which is our highlight, but I also want to share another program with you before our time is up, which is the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder. I figured we should talk about aquaculture for home gardening, since many of you are master gardeners, and then an upcoming event that's coming up. So first, I really wanted to give you just a little bit of background about me, both professionally and personally. So my name is Amy, and I actually was born and raised on the West Coast, and I started my career path in fisheries. My educational background was in marine science, and I worked as a field technician, initially collecting field data for the recreational sport fishery. And for about the last 4.5 years, I've been working in extension with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and Purdue University. But in my in-between, I have also been a specialty crop grower. My main crop was blackberries, but I did other types of produce and vegetables. And I also have been a farmer's market vendor. My day job for over a decade was a commercial fish farmer. I've worked on both finfish and shellfish farms, both in the state of Indiana. And I've done a little bit of international consulting with farms that were looking at either improving production or integrating new technology to become more sustainable. So the image you see on the screen right now is one of the 3 fish farms I worked on in Indiana. This farm is now Aqua Bounty. It was formerly known as Bell. And when I was there, we were the largest recirculating aquaculture facility in the United States. Our primary fish that we produced was yellow perch, but we also played with other species. So I've worked with a variety of different species from all the way from reproduction and eggs to marketing and sales. But on a personal level, and I thought I would share this since many of you are master gardeners, is I love spending time with my hands in the soil, raising flowers and fruit and vegetables. So at home, I mostly do flower gardening, but at the farm, we do fruit trees, berries. I stick as many berries in the ground as I can because I love to eat them, vegetables and flowers. I am also still farming fish. My husband is the owner and operator of Tipco Fish in Romney. And so even though that's not where I get my paycheck anymore, it's still very much a part of my identity and how I spend my personal time. And the thing I think that brings all that together is I love to cook and eat food. And so being able to raise food and eat local food is something I'm very passionate about. And so being able to have a protein source for that is fantastic with raising fish, but also being able to make dishes with those also homegrown vegetables is fantastic. And I also like to say that I'm an amateur photographer because I love to take pictures and then share those and use that in education. And so right now we're going to pivot from me and talk a little bit about seafood consumption, because seafood consumption in the Midwest is one of the reasons that Eat Midwest Fish was started as a program. And so the Midwest is traditionally a meat and potatoes region when it comes to dietary preferences. But one thing that we do know is that seafood is a really important part of a healthy eating pattern. The USDA recommends at least 8 ounces of seafood and shellfish per week, typically in 2 4-ounce portions. But another thing that we know by looking at trends in seafood consumption is that the majority of Americans are not eating even the lowest recommended amount of seafood consumption. And why that's important is that seafood provides many health benefits. And when people are lacking seafood in their diet as part of that healthy eating pattern, we start to see a lot of more chronic health conditions. For example, seafood is really good for your heart. And so by being able to incorporate that high quality protein in your diet can really help you be healthier and live longer. Now, when you said the majority, so 90% of Americans are not eating enough seafood. But when we look at regions, we can see from some current scientific research findings that it changes based on region, on how much seafood is consumed. And the Midwest has the lowest seafood consumption rate of any region in the United States. And so when you're looking at the map, the dark blues, that's higher seafood consumption rates. That icy light blue is low seafood consumption rates. So we can see that there are pockets, usually along a former working waterfront or a current working waterfront, or metropolitan areas where we see higher seafood consumption. And we know that culturally, people with different cultural backgrounds incorporate seafood differently into their diets. But what we can gain from this is that 90% of Americans aren't eating enough seafood, and people in the Midwest are eating lower amounts of seafood than other people in the United States. And so when we think about why that is, we know that the Midwest, unlike other regions, doesn't have a really vibrant history of a working waterfront. So we see that people that eat more seafood usually have some sort of association with recreational fishing, or have been close to an area where they can either go down to a dock and buy fresh fish, or they can go to a restaurant along the waterfront and eat fish that's been prepared that has just come from the dock. So because we are inland and we are moved from some of those historic fishing ports, seafood hasn't necessarily been integrated into our diets as much as some of the other regions in the United States. But times are a changing. And so one of the things that we have seen currently and through the last couple decades is we've seen farms spread across the United States into inland regions like the United States. So thanks to local farmers and fishers and technology, people in the Midwest have access to fresh and fresh frozen seafood like they didn't in the past. So I hear a lot of people say like, oh, I'm going to Florida, I can't wait to eat seafood. And yes, you can get fresh seafood in Florida, but yes, you can get fresh seafood in Indiana too. And so two of the examples I wanted to use to illustrate this is on your left, you can see, this is Mike Searcy. He's a trout farmer in Seymour, Indiana. And so he opened an indoor recirculating facility. It's environmentally controlled to be able to raise trout indoors sustainably, thinking about water and reusing the water. And so by him being in Seymour and producing a food fish that now is in the form of a fillet, we have more access to that fresh produced rainbow trout fillets that we wouldn't if he wasn't, within our state. And my other example is sushi. So I have an ongoing discussion with one of my colleagues about eating sushi in Indiana. And if you like sushi like I do, and if you have been on campus at Purdue, you know that we have a really good sushi restaurant here. And the picture next to that that's a IFQ, which is a device that's used to flash freeze fish. And so this is one of the pieces of technology that allows us to get fresh frozen fish really anywhere, is that by the development of this technology, they were able to freeze fish in a way that it did not damage the cell structure. So it didn't change the texture. And fish is something that people may like or dislike based on texture or flavor. And so it retains the texture and the flavor. So if it is flash frozen and correctly thawed, the quality and the taste of the fish is going to be the same as if it comes off of the boat. And with that being said, if you're eating sushi in Florida or you're eating sushi in Indiana, it all has to be frozen for food safety. So really, even though we don't think about like fresh seafood necessarily in Indiana, the quality of the fish in our sushi restaurants can be comparable to the quality of the fish that's in areas that are known for having fresh fish. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what is aquaculture and why aquaculture is important as a primer to talking about Eat Midwest Fish. And why I want to spend a few minutes on this is because as we do consumer research, we have learned that there are a lot of people that don't know what aquaculture is, or they may have a really limited understanding of what aquaculture is. And many people are exposed to aquaculture by maybe some extreme instances where aquaculture is highlighted in the news or social media feeds because of an instance that's gone wrong, when in more generally, aquaculture doesn't necessarily look like that, or not all facilities may even have those same types of issues. So I've chosen this definition because I'll get to it in a minute, but so the basics. So aquaculture, also called fish farming or fish culture, is the farming of fish and other aquatic life. In aquaculture, farmers help in growing the process to increase the production of fish for food, stocking, bait, fee fishing, and ornamentals. And why I wanted to use this definition to introduce what aquaculture is because we frequently think about aquaculture and seafood as something that is producing a food product. But there are aquaculture farmers that choose to raise fish or plants or other aquatic animals for market other than food. And that can be for recreation, for either catching fish, stalking fish, or even visually enjoying like a goldfish in our aquarium, but also can be for an experience like a fee fishing operation. And so with that said, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what aquaculture looks like in Indiana. And I'm going to do that by just generally talking about it and then introducing you to a few of the farms that we have throughout the state so you can get a feel on not only what aquaculture looks like, but who's growing fish in the state. So when I think about aquaculture in Indiana, the word that comes to mind is diverse. We have farms that are growing over 20 different species of mostly fish, but some shellfish as well. We have farms that are also integrating plant production to those systems. Farmers are using a variety of production methods. Their products are going to different end markets, and they may have completely different goals. And so, for example, of completely different goals, we have people that are commercial businesses that are their primary income. We have farms that are commercial businesses as secondary incomes. We have people that have brought aquaponics onto existing farms to be able to just kind of increase the diversity of their farm profile. But I can say that most farms in Indiana, aquaculture farms, are family businesses. They're small, family owned and operated. So the first farmers I want to introduce you guys to are Daryl and Corinna Brown. And so this is somewhat of a typical story. Daryl's dad actually was into horticulture and worked for Purdue. And they had a little bit of experience with swine production, but they wanted to look at having something in addition to their row crop farm, their greenhouses, and they wanted to bring in livestock. And what they chose to bring in is they chose to take an old barn that was used for raising cattle, and they turned it into an indoor shrimp farm. And so this farm is located just outside of Fowler, Indiana. And it's an example of a family owned and operated business. Daryl would be the second generation farmer. It's the first generation to bring aquaculture onto the farm. And I also wanted to share this farm because the one thing that we see growing is their horticulture greenhouses. And so when shrimp farming is all year round, but you may have limited hours per day that you're spending on that production system. And so he spends his other time raising soy and corn, but also raising plants in their horticulture greenhouses. And I also wanted to highlight them because shrimp are a saltwater species. And this illustrates that we can raise saltwater animals in Indiana and in an indoor environmentally controlled system. The second farmer I wanted to introduce you guys to is Leland Mader. Leland is the owner of Hanneloo Farms. He raises barramundi in a barn that he converted that used to be in swine production. And so he also is a row crop farmer, and he's at least the second generation and also is a first generation fish farmer. Him and his dad run both, they do corn and soy outside, and then they raise largemouth bass in ponds, but they also do barramundi in an indoor facility. So from these little snapshots, you can kind of see barramundi is an exotic species. He actually brings the fingerlings in from Australia, and then he raises them to a food fish market. He starts them out in a nursery tank, which you see on the kind of upper left, and then he puts them into his grow out tanks, which you see in that lower right. Now, as I mentioned before, not all fish or plants are grown for food. The third and final family I want to introduce you guys to are the Clevelands. The Clevelands own and operate Ozark Fisheries, which is a 4th generation family owned and operated goldfish and koi farm down in Martinsville. So you can see from this photo that they're not raising their fish indoors. They do have some of their production indoors, but they really are raising their fish mostly in outside earthen ponds. They do have a little bit of their hatchery production indoors, and they will bring them in for holding before they go into shipping. But you can see that their farm is, as I said, earthen ponds, and they are specializing in fish that go to that ornamental market. So why is aquaculture important? And one way to think about it is, so I'll back up a minute. I almost got ahead of myself. Aquaculture has been a focus of importance when it comes to food security for several decades now. When government agencies and scientists are looking at the growth of the population of the world and how is that population going to be fed as it grows, and what are high quality protein sources, fish comes high on that list. Fish has one of the best food conversion ratios. It's usually about 1 to 1.2. It is close to chicken. It's significantly lower than our other terrestrial proteins, but also because as the populations grow, there are certain cultures that really value fish as part of their diets. And we also know that fish is really important for healthy eating habits. So the question is, how do you provide fish to the growing population and current population, when by looking at this graph, you can see that historically our seafood has come from wild capture fisheries, but about in the 1980s, the wild capture fishery plateaus. So as the demand for seafood goes up, it's not going to come from the ocean because we can only harvest so much from the ocean without detrimentally affecting the populations. So to be able to sustain fisheries and keep from overfishing, that protein has to come from somewhere else. And where that protein is coming from, it's coming from aquaculture. And you can see from the graph that they've broken it into marine waters. So that would mostly be like in the United States, we have a lot of oyster production off the West Coast, and then inland fisheries. So Indiana, our farms in Indiana would be examples of inland fisheries. But other reasons are not only that there's a high demand, is that aquaculture can be very sustainable, and the food that's raised is a healthy source of lean protein. And so that is my transition into Eat Midwest Fish. So that's a little bit of background. And so what is Eat Midwest Fish? So Eat Midwest Fish is a consumer education program that is focused on aquaculture literacy, local foods, nutrition, and safety, and then also to inspire people to cook more fish at home or to consume more fish. The other important thing to know about Eat Midwest Fish is it was guided by research, and it continues to be guided by research and scientific findings. So before the Eat Midwest Fish program was started, there were several different research studies that either looked at from the producer's perspective, what the hurdles were for marketing and selling fish to local markets, but also what consumer preferences were. And so when farmers were asked, what are the main hurdles you're facing when marketing your products, the number one hurdle that they mentioned was consumer education. And some of the things that came out is that farmers, they talk a lot with consumers about seafood. So they have a pretty good perspective on some of the issues that prevent people from purchasing seafood. And some of the things that were mentioned is that there are a lot of misconceptions around farm-raised fish. People don't understand necessarily the value or the price. So the question is, like the picture here, we have head-on shrimp that's raised in Indiana. Why is that shrimp more expensive than shrimp that's raised in China or Vietnam and imported into the United States? Are there safety issues? Some people they don't understand the color of a fish or a shrimp, or are there chemicals in farm raised fish? What should we be concerned about? But also farmers saw that there was a need for consumer education on, as they would say, what we do and what we supply. So how are farmers raising fish in Indiana or the Midwest, and what kind of products do they have for sale? Another area that came up was this how-to area. So going back to the example of shrimp, if you go out to, for example, our shrimp, and you buy freshly harvested shrimp, they're going to have their heads on, and they're going to send them home to you in a bag on ice with their heads on. So what do you do with those? How do you peel them? How do you devein them? So there's this like some gap in understanding, because there's many people in our area that aren't used to handling a seafood product that's not processed. But also there was a need for education for chefs to utilize whole fish, and how to select different types of seafood. Now, one thing that we saw when we look at consumer preference surveys is we also saw that when consumers were asked, why didn't you prepare food at home? And this was a survey that was done in 2019. The number one answer was, I am uncertain of how to prepare it. So that really reinforced, we heard from farmers that people don't understand my product. They don't know what to do with it. That how do I dehead and devein a shrimp and peel it? But we also saw from the consumer side, them saying, I'm not eating more seafood at home because I don't know how to prepare it. So that really helped guide what types of content that we would develop to help with that consumer education component. But as you can see from the data of the survey of 2019, when Eat Midwest Fish was beginning to be developed, it was also the time of COVID. And so COVID really influenced how the program was developed, because when it was developed, we were at a time where we were still at home. We weren't even going to the office, and we couldn't have any in-person programming. And so we asked, how can we reach consumers and teach them about not only how fish are raised in the Midwest, but the health benefits of eating fish, and inspire them to cook fish at home and to increase the amount of seafood that they have in their weekly diets. And so the answer for us was meet consumers where consumers are. And at that time, and even now, we find that a lot of consumers and a lot of people that are seeking to build skills and learn new things are using the internet as their main platform for finding information. And we do also know that some consumers, some users they prefer reading, but other people prefer audio visual content. So we really wanted to build content that would meet an audience where an audience was. So whatever their preference was for learning, we wanted to be able to provide content in a way that was accessible to them. And so what came of all that was Eat Midwest Fish, and Eat Midwest Fish, really the hub of it is a website. I don't want to go on too fast. Okay, I got lost for a second there. And so the idea is that we wanted to be able to have a home for everything that was created in that realm of consumer education, based on the guidance that we learned from research on what types of educational topics were requested. And so one of the things that we did is we had specific goals on the type of content that was created. to be able to address the specific concerns that we heard from farmers or from consumers on what those hurdles were for people to eat more seafood. And so one of the examples of that is I shared in the interview results that one of the things, the consumer preference survey results was one of the things that we heard was, I'm uncertain of how to prepare it, meaning seafood. And so we really wanted to be able to provide inspiration through recipes, but also cooking demonstrations. And we couldn't do these cooking demonstrations live, so we decided to put them on YouTube and still have video content that people could watch on their own. And so one of the requirements for a recipe or a cooking demonstration for Eat Midwest Fish is that the main ingredient is a fish that is raised within the Midwest. And so it's also to highlight the different types of seafood that we raise in the Midwest. So regardless of what farm is closest to you or what fish you may have access to, there would be things that would interest you. And so right now we have a recipe library that's got about 40, a little more than 40 recipes, and that continues to grow. We have 9 cooking demonstration videos in our local flavors, local fish series. And one of the fun things is that we have during the summer seasons, when we have fresh herbs available, we're able to use those fresh locally grown herbs, and then also highlight some sides that are local products as well. And then one of the things that is a little bit slow, but we'll continue to build on, is that idea of, how do I prepare it when I get it home? How do I cook it? How do I handle it before I'm ready to cook it? So one of the things that is pretty common to farms in Indiana and the Midwest is that they're small. And so they may not have enough production to be able to sell at a local grocery store. And many of their products are not going to be processed. So as we saw with the whole head-on shrimp, that is the most common way that you would purchase farm-raised shrimp in Indiana. It's also common for fish that you would find fish sold whole, either from the farm or from a grocery store. So that creates that need for that skill of being able to fillet or process some of those products. And we wanted to be able to provide some instruction on how to do that. So right now our how to clean is a barramundi demonstration on how to fillet a barramundi. Now, when we look at one of the farmers' quotes was, what we do and what we supply. So what does farming look like on a day-to-day? How are people farming? One of the very common illustrations of fish farming is what people, as I said, may have seen in newspapers or social media. So fish farming in Indiana is not raising fish in net pens in Lake Michigan. It is inland operations, either in pole barns or indoor facilities, or usually in earthen ponds. And so one of the ways that we would like to tell those stories, and we'll continue to tell those stories, is through the words of farmers. And so one of the features on Eat Midwest Fish is the Local Farmers, Local Fish video series. And so this is an opportunity for you to virtually go to a farm and to see how fish are being raised, and to hear from farmers about their passion, why they're raising fish, and just to kind of get to know them a little bit as a person, and to help paint the picture as a whole. So when we look at one episode, we might, for example, the one that we can see here is largemouth bass. That's a farm in Southern Illinois that raises largemouth bass in an outdoor pond. But when we put those together, we can see the diversity of aquaculture throughout the Midwest, both by species, by farmers' backgrounds, and also by how they're raising fish, what kind of systems they're raising in, or even what their end goals are. So for example, one of our local farmers, local fish episodes is on Metro Farms in Chicago, which is a nonprofit that is really passionate about increasing not only food accessibility, but healthy living in the inner city of Chicago. And they're doing that through aquaponics. And so they're raising tilapia with salad greens and other types of vegetables and providing the knowledge to do that to their community and the products as well for local consumption. So I mentioned that we didn't only want to provide video content, we also wanted to provide content, excuse me, in a way that people could read. If that was their preference. And I have images on this slide that aren't showing up, and I apologize for that. But so one of the examples of stagnant content with text to be able to read and to learn about the fish in Indiana is we have a page that's dedicated for really, I guess, displaying the different types of fish that are raised. It's our fish guide. And so it has a line drawing with the genus and species. And you can see that there's some of them have fact sheet under it. And so our local farm I'm getting all mixed up. I have to slow down for a second. Our local fish fact sheets are a guide for seafood consumption. And so it has information on where fish come from that you're purchasing, the health benefits, safety, any concerns you might have, kind of addressing those concerns. But then also on the back, there's a recipe to help kind of just inspire to try new things, because one of the really cool things about seafood is the diversity of texture and flavor. And so even if you don't like one type of fish, there might be another seafood product that you really like. And so it's finding the products that you like and how to cook them can help us increase how much seafood we consume. Since seafood is such an important part of diets, we also wanted to touch on health and nutrition, both talking about the benefits of eating seafood, but also the benefits of eating seafood at different stages in our lives. And that is either through learning about the importance of omega-3 fatty acids, or looking at seafood advice for specific people at specific times in their life. And so you can see in that lower left-hand corner, there's a logo for Fish for Your Health, which is kind of an offshoot. It's a program that's come under Eat Midwest Fish. It was developed by researchers out of Purdue to advise pregnant women, nursing women, and families on how to incorporate fish into their diets, because fish is so important for the development of fetal brains and children's eyes and other features. And so the Fish for Health advisory, that is showing, you know, what fish are high in omega-3 fatty acids, because DHA is really important for development of both, all the way from fetuses all the way through children of about the age of 12. But also what kind of fish we should avoid. So there are fish that have low or maybe higher levels of either mercury or PCBs. So how do we balance that? And so that is a program that helps advise families on what fish to eat and what fish not to eat during that stage of life, for both moms and for kids. The other thing to touch on when it comes to advisories are, is it safe to eat a fish that's caught out of a recreational waterway? And depending on where you are and what the status of pollution or even restoration is on the waterway, fish may be safe or unsafe to eat based on the waterway or based on the fish. And so spending some time talking about, is a fish safe to eat? If I catch it, should I put it back? Is really dependent on the waterway that that fish comes out of. And there are state advisories for states and counties and specific waterways that you can look at before you fish to make sure that you know which fish you can eat, how many you can eat. Because many fish have very small amounts of mercury, but you want to make sure that you're not eating old fish or large fish that have had the opportunity to bioaccumulate larger quantities of mercury. So Eat Midwest Fish isn't just about, is it beneficial to eat fish and where to find fish, but sometimes it's just about having fun. And one of the really fun things we've gotten to do over the years is create a coloring book for kids and families to learn about the different fish that are raised for both food and recreation throughout the region. The coloring book is a little bit unique in the sense that it has content that was developed by fisheries and aquaculture experts for beginning and advanced readers and was guided by was guided by educators to make sure that that content was appropriate for the grade levels of the audience. There's also a read-along feature, and it's available in professional print, but also you can print it in at home as well. So the last thing I want to touch on Eat Midwest Fish is, as I said before, one of the things that we faced in the beginning of the program development is that not only were we at home because we had stay-at-home orders, but restaurants were closed or only available for takeout. And so one of the things that we saw is that there was this change in how we were buying food and eating food. And so one of the objectives was to also create a feature that could help consumers find locally produced fish within their region. And so that came in the form of the Fresh Fish map, which is an interactive map. It does feature farm-raised fish. They're almost all food fish businesses, but there are some fee fishing businesses. And so with fee fishing, it's kind of the combination of you get to experience fishing, catching, and then you get to take it home and prepare it at home. So that still is a food fish. It is searchable by location and by, I would say, how many miles you're willing to drive. So not only by your exact location, but it'll be a region, but you can also filter it by the types of species or a specific service that you're looking for. And one other thing that I wanted to mention, a complementary program to Eat Midwest Fish is the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder. And it's similar. It has an overlapping geographic area. So Eat Midwest Fish covers the 12 Midwestern states, from Ohio over to the Dakotas, and down to Missouri and Kansas. But the Great Lakes Fresh Fish Finder are the states that border the Great Lakes, from Minnesota all the way out to New York. And the big difference is that it really focuses on wild caught and farm raised products, but for products that are sold not only for food and feed fishing, but also for bait, stocking, and ornamentals. And why I want to mention this is that sometime as a home gardener, or as somebody that wants to incorporate something small inside their home or outside of their home, you might not be looking for a food fish. You might be looking for a goldfish or something for an ornamental aquarium, or you might be looking for something for a water feature or to stock your pond out back. And so there are resources in addition to Eat Midwest Fish, where you can find additional local businesses that have those types of products for sale. So I wanted to spend the last little bit of our time before we go into questions in talking a little bit about fish and plants and how you can integrate fish into gardens and landscapes. So when we talk about aquaculture it's not only the raising of fish, but traditionally that definition has been for commercial production. But we know that people are using aquaculture concepts and are still excited about integrating the production of fish or other aquatic plants and animals into different types of scenarios. And a couple of things I wanted to touch on are water gardens and aquaponics. So first, I'm going to just take a minute to talk about water gardens. And this is something that we see often, maybe somebody that's more interested in creating that visually interesting area in your backyard or on your property. That may not incorporate food products. It may incorporate merely decorative plants. But by adding fish to that, it also creates the ability to add other colors and motion, and it just creates a different decorative element. And so water gardens are a way that I would say property owners really can incorporate and begin to learn about some of the basic principles of aquaculture. And so even with a basic feature in the backyard, you have a tank, or a pond. I mean, you have an area where those plants and animals are grown. You're moving water, which is a principle of aquaculture. You want to move water to be able to remove wastes and make sure that that water is clean, so that those animals can have a really healthy environment for living. Another way that we see aquaculture incorporated into people's homes and gardens is in the form of aquaponics. And so aquaponics is a form of agriculture that combines raising fish in tanks, typically recirculating aquaculture systems, with soilless plant culture, which many of you may be familiar with hydroponics. And in aquaponics, that nutrient-rich water from the fish provides the natural fertilizer for the plants. And then the plants clean the water, which is then returned to the fish. And so in this example, you can see that we've got fish down below. The water from the fish tank is pumped up to the top, and then it cascades through the lettuce and then returns to the fish. And we see this in different scales. So aquaponics we see in homes. Sometimes it's small, it's for home decor. So in the middle, we see, this lovely betta fish with a house plant. That's the most basic form of aquaponics, but it still has the same concept. So the plant is being fed from the fish waste, and the plant is cleaning the water for the fish. We also see slightly larger. We can see that to the right, we have some goldfish in a small tank that the home owner is raising sprouts. And so this is food production in combination with a fish tank, which is for enjoyment, that ornamental fish component. And then on the left, we can see that there are cases where people take aquariums and use plants to filter their aquarium water. So they actually take the traditional filter that comes with it, and they replace that with plant production. And so you can see that this is like a taking it to a little bit next level, because you have more things to balance. You've got more fish there, you've got more plants there. So it takes a little bit more to balance that nutrients. The more fish and the more plants we put in, the more complicated it can become with just keeping that system in balance. On the top of that, you can see that they're growing herbs, and herbs are very popular aquaponic plants, both for commercial and home growers. We see basil is very commonly grown in aquaponic systems. Now, taking that to the next level, we can see that this is an example of a family that has integrated fish production into their produce production by putting an aquaponics unit onto their homestead. And so just thinking about how those concepts of aquaculture, they're not limited to being used for commercial purposes. They can be used by homeowners to be able to produce protein and produce for your families. And I'm right before questions, I'm going to leave you with this, because this is an event that's coming up on April 18th, which is, I think, a perfect example of how somebody has taken a water feature, learned from that, and then decided, like, hey, let's incorporate this into our family garden to be able to provide food for our family. And so the event that I'm sharing is Fish and Flora. It's being put on by the Indiana Aquaculture Association. And it's an opportunity to go and tour a homestead that has built an aquaponics facility onto their property, and they're running a cold water and a warm water system. They raise a variety of different fish species, and then they're raising a variety of different plants with the goal to be able to feed their family. And with that, if we have time for questions, it would be that time.
Yes, so there was a question about the map, the Indiana fish consumption map. I don't know if you can pull that up, but it was about finding how to read it or what was good and what was not good. I don't know if you wanted to go through that.
I'm wondering, I stopped sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see.
I think the link was in the chat.
Yeah, I wanted to do something a little bit different, I think. I want to pull up the map so we can kind of play with it while we're talking about it, if I can figure out how to find my browser.
Gotta ask while you're looking for that, Amy, what's your favorite type of fish to prepare?
Oh man, I love so many different kinds of fish. Oh,
I put you on the spot.
I know, you really did. You put me on the spot. Sometimes I like things that are just fast. One of the recipes that I really love is sauteed tilapia. So you cut lemons into these little wedges, you melt some butter in the pan, and you put the lemon in there, and then it's a quick, you cook the tilapia about halfway and then you flip it. It is so good. My stepdaughter said it was her favorite new fish recipe, which is a shock because usually tilapia is not people's top choice.
Well, I think I was on this earth for a solid, I think, 26 years before I started putting lemon on my fish. And that was life-changing.
I think you were missing out.
I was big time, big time.
Okay, I am almost there.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Can you see the map now?
We can see the Midwest fish. It's the big fish farms map.
Oh. Um, it's not the Eat Midwest Fish map.
Mm-mm. Which here I can throw, maybe if I can find the chat box here. No. I just put the link to the map in the chat box, if that'll work. For the Indiana Fish Consumption Advisory.
Oh, okay. Let
Um,
me. I misunderstood which one we were going to.
oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. That's on me, not on you. There's just so many maps.
They're good maps, they're good resources. And for those of you joining, we'll get those links in our follow-up email. So just look for an email from Courtney. We'll have those in there. Sorry, Courtney, I'm delegating stuff for you.
They're already in the done.
Okay.
Perfect.
Am I sharing the right map now? Oh, no.
It's your browser.
Huh. Well, I'm not going to try it. Let's just ask the question. That was a fail. So the question was how to use it.
Right, which I might hear.
It's supposed to say whether you can consume or not consume the fish in these waters. And I was wondering how you tell, because on the legend it says do not eat is red and then other blue, but I wasn't seeing any red on the map, which maybe we are okay then the whole
Do you
state.
see my screen? I tried to pull it up, but I might
yeah.
be looking at my, is it
Yeah.
my email or is it the map?
It's your
It-
screen, it's the map.
It is the map.
Okay, so I was just looking, the only thing I saw were these rivers that were red.
Yeah. So the if you
But I think you just have to kind of zoom in, but not all the.
yeah, you do. So because the orange is just public access. So that's
Right.
telling you it's a public fishing area. And then the don't eat would be illustrated by the red. But with that being said, this map is somewhat limited because a lot of times we find that it's not necessarily just the waterway. It has to do with the species of fish and the age of the fish. And so there are waterways that it's don't eat at all, don't eat anything that comes from this. But there are waterways that may say like, don't eat more than 2 of these fish in a month. I haven't looked at this map in a while to play with it, but what I'm not seeing on it is I'm not seeing the ability to be able to see a recommendation of species or frequency. It's just a do or don't.
I was able to click on the little orange buttons, and this has the sensitive population includes females under the age of 50. But then it goes through the different species, 1 meal per week for buffalo
Yeah.
species, channel cat. Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, we've got
not
other
eat.
questions in the chat box for you. Let's see, Sandra, what are the fish fed in terms of healthiness? What is the difference between a wild caught fish and a farmed fish?
So for the most part, almost all farmed raised fish are fed formulated feeds. And so there's been decades of research done to determine what the nutritional needs of fish are. And so they have formulated feeds that are based on not only species, but also by life cycle. So for example, very small fish are fed higher protein diets than a larger fish because the larger fish doesn't necessarily need it. So it also is depending on what kind of fish they are. So am I a fish that eats other fish? Am I a fish that eats plants and animals? So those are specially formulated diets. The differences between wild and farmed, there are some, and it's also depending on where they're being farmed. And so, for example, in the United States, the regulations are different than different countries. So when we look at the nutritional profiles of fish that are raised, for example, on farms or in the wild, sometimes we will see slightly different profiles. So they might, like one might be have a little bit more fat. One might have, like salmon might be high in omega-3s, but one might have a little bit more than others. And so when I think about that, I think about research like out of Norway that's looking at farmed raised versus wild caught salmon. And when they look at that, those profiles are slightly different, and the chemicals might be slightly different, but they're both considered healthy choices. On occasion, there will be a product that's coming from outside of the United States that gets red flagged. Like there's products coming out of Bangladesh that are high in metals. So it is kind of important to think about where your fish comes from. And just like the recreational fisheries, most of the commercial fishing is limited to waters where there are not high levels of contaminants. So for example, in the rivers where they're catching things like Asian carp and other types of catfish and other types of fish, they aren't allowed to commercially fish in waters that have really high pollutants that have not been fixed. So I guess the bottom line is the profiles are slightly different. US tends to be safe. Some imported products may have things you may not want to consume. So there are protocols in other countries where, for example, farmers put antibiotics into the feed all the time. So we don't do that in the United States. And so usually the recommendation is eat US fish, wild or farm raised. And those nutrient profiles may vary, but they're both, there's good products out of both sectors. That might have made it more confusing than answering the question, but you can ask a follow-up question if I did do that.
We have another one. Are sufficient measures taken on fish farms to prevent contamination of water by fish poop?
Yes, and I'm assuming that you're talking about the fish poop that would cause problems within the farm. So one of the principles of fish farming is to get fish waste out or to remediate it as quickly as possible, because when fish poop, they release ammonia, and ammonia and nitrite are very toxic to fish. So what the farmer's job is the farmer's job is to make sure to, one, get the solids out as fast as possible, and to be able to put in some sort of filtration, whether it's plants or something that would be within a natural water column, or mechanical filtration to be able to both remove those solids and to be able to remove the chemicals that are associated with that waste. So when we were looking at, like, for example, the Barramundi farm, the water will leave that tank. There's a solids capture device that is going to capture the solid waste. And then the liquid waste, which would be ammonia, then goes through a biological filter. But then the biological filter converts the ammonia to nitrite, and then to nitrate, it cleans the water and is being able to recirculate it into the system. In a pond setting, it's a little bit different because the pond actually works as the filtration, and then they would also use exchanging water to be able to help with that. It also, the other side of that is fish poop and nutrients is a concern for affluent water as well. And so farmers that are discharging water into natural waterways, they would have to put in some kind of filtration system to be able to clean that water before the water can go into the natural waterway.
Okay, and next question would be, what about pesticides in aquafarmed fish? Example, mosquito controlling.
Ooh. Pesticides. So this might be I will say this might be a slightly stumped Amy question. Because it really depends where our fish are raised. So almost all the fish that are raised in Indiana are raised indoors. And so they would not be exposed to the pesticides, for example, that are sprayed on the agricultural fields in the nearby community. There are instances, pesticides are can be very harmful to fish. And so especially shellfish. And so farms that are concerned with that, they bring their farm indoors to eliminate that. If a farm is outdoors, there is the possibility that they would have exposure. And the farm can do testing to verify that there are no builds up of those pesticides within the fish flesh.
So while we've got a little break here, thank you, Amy, for staying on. I know we're past our 1 hour. Folks, if you look in the chat box, we've got our post survey link for the program. Amy, if you're free to stay on for a few more minutes, great. If not, we've taken the full hour. That was a great presentation. We appreciate you coming on with that. I'm going to stop the recording.